Poll question today. Who is the Canucks MVP so far? Demko, Hughes, Miller, Pettersson. You can vote at Sekeres and Price on Twitter and YouTube, and we will put it to our next guest, rink-wide chef Paterson, Canucks reporter, busy after a 4-3 shootout loss to Columbus on Monday. Jeff, how are we?
Good. Yeah. A day off, as you can imagine, for the Vancouver Canucks. If ever there was a sure thing, it was this one after 7 games in 12 nights and their travel troubles. They got back home. And so a day off, and I guess they'll get back at it probably with a Wednesday practice, get ready for Arizona and the start of this 5-game homestand now that's going to take them up to the All-Star break.
Answer me the poll. Where are you casting your MVP vote for the club if it was held today?
Yeah, I've been on Team Quinn all season. The start of the season was so important. I mean, just think of all the talk in the offseason. We were a big part of that. Everybody that had a voice was this team has to get off to a big start. And they named him captain. He seemed to take that responsibility to heart. And the way he played, the way the team got out of the gate. And I think really when I look at all of the reasons for success for the Vancouver Canucks this year, like I thought Quinn Hughes had a decade of sort of 75-point seasons in him. I didn't know that he was going to level up to the level that he has, where he's going to take a legitimate run at a 100-point season. And we saw Erik Karlsson get there last year in San Jose, but I think the second half of the season in San Jose was devoted to, every second touch had to be Erik Karlsson just to run up those point totals. Wins didn't matter. Results were not important. It's different here. And Quinn Hughes has gone about his business and was so productive in the early going. His pace has slowed a little, but not a lot. And so I just think there are a lot of guys that have leveled up, but nobody more so than Quinn Hughes. And I just think the leadership, the focus, the determination, the dedication, all of that gives him an edge here. But it's incredible. And I think that you could make a pretty compelling case for anybody that's on this poll here as an option.
It's been quite a start to the season for him, for the team. We're past the halfway mark. They finished this long road trip. By the way, first game back after a long road trip, that trap game that we've always talked about. What is it like after a 7-game road trip? What does the Coyotes game look like? We'll find out. Eventually, this team's going to lose 3 games in a row. I don't think this is going to be a regression thing, though. Are we worried about this team being tired? They played so many games. They've been at the top of the games played column in the entire league for much of this season. Do you think there's going to be some fatigue here in the not too distant future for this team, having played at this level for so long now?
Well, 5 here at home, and then basically 10 days off, except for the guys that have to go to Toronto. But they start out of the All-Star break in Carolina, so they were going to have to work their way east eventually. I do think that that November into December stretch was an absolute gauntlet. What did they play? 23 games in 45 nights and more than held their own. In fact, they stretched their lead on a lot of the teams in the chase back there. So I do think the second half will lighten. It'll ease the burden a little bit. And teams like Los Angeles and Edmonton that still have a ton of hockey to be played, they're going to have to do it over a compressed portion of the second half of the season. Ultimately, they all start in the starting gate. They get to the finish line at the same time, and everybody's got stretches in their schedule. Everybody's got quirks in their schedule. Not everybody has to bus from Buffalo to Toronto to avoid snowfall to make their next game. But, challenges come at you in different ways. But I do think that the fact that the load is lightened somewhat after the All-Star break, they've got that 9-game homestand in March, and the hope always was by back-end loading with all the home games that, those would put them in a pretty good place to make the playoffs. Well, I think they're well ahead of that portion of the curve now. So, it'll be interesting to see how many days off they're given, how Rick Tocchet goes about handling workloads and load management and goaltending and all those types of things. But I do think that the heaviest portion of the travel now, with this 7 out of the way, they've got a 5-gamer out of the All-Star break that takes them back east. But other than that, it's, a 2 here and 1 there. And so it's a grind. It always is, but winning is fun. And I think for the most part, these guys are having a fair bit of fun, even if it was a slog to get from Buffalo to Columbus. And it looked that way as that game unfolded. You could see that they were sort of at the end of their line, literally and figuratively, on the 7-game road trip.
As we look ahead to the schedule, too, remember we were lamenting the fact they hadn't played L.A., and they got all these L.A. games ahead. While L.A.'s sinking, they finished their season series with the Oilers, and the Oilers are rising. So in that sense, they caught all those teams sort of at the right point, maybe.
Yeah, and if you look at, I know people were lamenting the fact that, the Canucks were playing all these games in December, and LA seemed to have a bunch of time off and falling behind the curve in terms of games played. Well, if you go and look at the Los Angeles Kings schedule, that first game that they play head-to-head on February 29th, like the Kings are all over the map in the month of February. I think they're out east twice, and they arrive in Vancouver at the tail end of a daunting stretch for them. So, the Canucks were that way. Like, I think back to a couple of the losses, the one in Columbus here yesterday. You always talk about scheduled losses, 7-12. They still managed to get a single point. The loss in San Jose back in late November, that was the end of 10 games in 17 nights. And, it's understandable. Like, we think of these guys as superheroes, but ultimately they're just elite athletes, but they're human beings too. And there is a limit to how they can be expected to perform on a nightly basis. But I think it has spoken a little bit, guys, to the maturity in the marketplace too, that, nobody freaked out when they lost to the Sharks. Like, yeah, it was a bit of a blemish on their record. Certainly.
It was a shame. It was a shame to throw away those 2 points, but
but
you're right.
people
Nobody freaked out.
weren't, screaming from the top of rooftops and things. And same here in Columbus. Like, you can understand that they went 5-1-1 on the road trip. And if that was an off day and they didn't have it, they still managed to get it to overtime and had their chance on a power play briefly in overtime in the shootout. And go 5-1-1 on the road trip. Like, that's pretty incredible stuff. And to sweep the New York area and do things that this team has never done in a half century of existence. So I do think that there's a maturity in the way that people are handling the rare occasion when the Vancouver Canucks come up on the short end of the scoreboard.
I saw you wrote on Kuzmenko and his road trip, and there were a whole lot of zeros there in the counting stat
Yes,
categories. But is there a case that he had a better road trip than that would suggest, Jeff?
Yeah, I've got a piece of Canucks Army that explores this, because you're right. It was no goals, no assists, no points, no penalty minutes, no hits, no faceoffs because he doesn't take faceoffs. Like, it really was a ghost of a road trip for Andrei Kuzmenko that started with a healthy scratch in St. Louis and didn't get terribly more impactful the rest of the way. But you say that, and you look at the game in Columbus when other guys were starting to tire. He matched his high ice time for the road trip at 15 and a half minutes. I think he played 15:39 against the Blue Jackets. He had a shift in overtime. In fact, he had the Canucks only shot in overtime. So in other tight games where he's been benched, we've seen Rick Tocchet use him in overtime. He had shifts in Pittsburgh in overtime as well. The underlying numbers for the road trip weren't bad. Like, the Canucks controlled shot share and scoring chances, but that line with Pia Suter and Ilya Mikheyev did not produce a single goal in the 6 games that they've been put together. And so thank goodness for the Lotto line, and to a lesser degree, that third line that's really the second line. And you just wonder, these tight games against the Penguins, the Sabres, and on Monday against the Blue Jackets, like, what could a goal from Kuzmenko or Mikheyev or Suter have done to sort of ease the burden on the Vancouver Canucks? Again, they go 5-1-1. So, it's not like that line, ruined the road trip in any way. But, Andrei Kuzmenko hasn't scored a road goal since that 10-1 romp in San Jose on November the 2nd. He hasn't picked up a road point, guys, since November 12th in Montreal. Like, there are still road games on the schedule. And guess what? Come playoff time, seems to me that you play at least half of your games, or pretty close to it, away from home. So, again, like, there was effort. To the eye, there was effort from Kuzmenko on the road trip, but has the bar fallen that low so quickly that we're going to sit here and praise him for effort, making $5.5 million when he made it look so easy last year to score all of the goals that he did? So, I'm not sure. The road trip started with a healthy scratch for him, not a single point along the way. I'm not sure that Rick Tocchet is a whole lot further ahead with this guy than he was when he embarked on this road trip, and it still, to me, remains the big weakness for this hockey club, not just Kuzmenko, but certainly that second line of scoring, the support for the Lotto line on the nights where they're not going, or they just don't have it, or they're held in check. And, the power play could help too. If the power play could heat up again like it did early in the season, that would take a little bit of the scoring burden off those guys 5-on-5. But yeah, and look, it's not just Kuzmenko. I got to point out, like, Ilya Mikheyev's got a dozen games now without a goal and one in his last 16. I know he hit a post in Buffalo, so he was close, but that Suter, Mikheyev, Kuzmenko line got outscored 2-0 in the 6 games they were together on the road trip. So they're not getting torched defensively. They're essentially holding their own. But to me, it just feels this season, the way it's unfolded, that the bar has to be a little bit higher than holding your own, especially when the two wingers are both making $5 million plus.
And one of the other things I wanted to ask you about with regards to the Columbus game last night or Monday, where boy, Ian Cole had a tough go, and Nikita Zadorov was rather frisky with the puck. That pairing, Jeff, could that sort of be some of the kryptonite for the Canucks if Zadorov's getting a little too frisky with the puck and Cole continues to struggle with some of the zone exits? In fact, Carson Soucy, if you go back and look at his career, zone exits haven't been his greatest strength either. Did you see a red flag there from Columbus?
Look, I've been a big fan of Ian Cole. Like, I liked the signing at the time. I think this guy and his experience and the championship pedigree and everything else, and he's a great guy to deal with. Not that matters ultimately in his on-ice performance, but there's just been a lot to like about Ian Cole. And yeah, I mean, whatever happened, whether it was fatigue at the end of a road trip for the oldest player on the roster who turns 35 here in February, they load managed him against the Islanders. They were willing to do that and didn't skip a beat. I thought like it would have made sense, especially given the added travel troubles late in the day, that why not just ask him or tell him to sit down again? Noah Juleson has played well when, asked to perform, and fresh legs there. I thought you could have made an argument even to get Linus Karlsson into the lineup at the end of the road trip as well. As for Zadorov, I think for the most part, he's been a pretty good addition. We've seen him be physical and stick up for teammates and those types of things that he has to continue to do. But there have been some moments with the puck that absolutely, it's been an adventure, I think, of him trying to stick handle through the Philadelphia Flyers, having his pocket picked here in the game after Christmas and giving up a breakaway that ended up in the back of the net. So I think Ian Cole, I'm going to give him a pass for one of, if not his toughest night of the season so far, but certainly something to monitor, especially if he's going to continue to be asked to play on his offhand there as a lefty moving over to the right side. So, your point about Soucy, the question was there when they signed him. He's always been a good third pairing guy. Can he play higher in the lineup? And, along with Tyler Myers, if Cole and Zadorov are struggling and they reduce their ice time, then that's going to put more on the plate of Soucy and Myers. And again, they're not going to play the Columbus Blue Jackets down the stretch and into the playoffs. They are going to face better teams that will try to jump those advantages wherever they can get them. So, yeah, I think the defense is still, Rick Tocchet called it a committee early on. I think the committee essentially has been set, but it is a question of deployment and ice time and maybe just trying to get a feel for who's going on a given night and try and guide the ice times that way.
It doesn't have to be Cole and Zadorov, though, does it? Like, it could be, they could try Soucy there, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's something that's within the, I just don't know what we call the second and the third pair here. And I don't know that Rick Tocchet knows that.
No, and I don't know that they're basing anything. Remember, they tried Carson Soucy with Quinn Hughes training camp, and it didn't last very long. And he did struggle over on that side, even though he has played a little bit there. I think Soucy has back in the lineup. He's just kind of been a calming influence. He's played reasonably well here. But yeah, I think, and this would feel like the time, like whether it's a 5-game homestand here at the end of January or even into February, if you're going to continue to load manage at times, why not experiment a little bit? Like, I can't imagine that there would be this massive drop off if you wanted to try Soucy over on the right side and pair him with somebody else. All of this can be used as information gathering so that they can get to the final 15, 10 games of the regular season and really, put their playoff preparation in place then. So I wouldn't have any issue if they wanted to do a little experimentation, whether it's in practice or ultimately, live bullets, in-game action. But I think that that's something that they probably should look at.
Does that extend to Hronek anchoring his own pair and getting a sense of what he can do away from Quinn Hughes before you pay him the big money? There was a JFresh hockey card this week on Hronek, which wasn't most flattering. Do you need to see what Hronek can do away from Hughes before giving him the big ticket?
My hunch is that they're not going to do that the coaching staff, management may have other ideas there. I just think that they have liked what they've seen. They like the juice that it's produced with that pairing. Again, where they are in the standings right now, if ever there was a time to do it, maybe it would be here, because you're right. You still see it on occasion. And I think to the Pittsburgh game the other night, the Sidney Crosby goal down the wing, Philip Hronek makes a bad pinch. Now, lots of guys make bad pinches. And one thing the Canucks have been so good at this season is recovering and not compounding mistakes. And you look at that first Columbus goal yesterday, Bluger loses a board battle. That's fine. But everybody's on the one side of the ice. The middle of the ice is wide open. That's something that the Canucks haven't done very often, is compound their mistakes. But, yeah, I still see from time to time in isolation, you see some questionable decisions from Philip Hronek. I mean, he has absolutely been terrific at this price point, but you're right. Like every dollar matters moving forward with the OEL buyout and the other tickets that other guys are going to require here. So they can't just go and basically meet his demands. They've got to figure out ultimately what they think he is worth to this hockey club. He's going to get a raise, but it's just a question of, is he going to start with a 7? I'm sure the Hronek camp with the point totals thinks that it can probably squeeze somewhere up into the 8s. I don't think that ultimately, given his track record, I mean, the season looks like the outlier. He's always been a sort of 40-point-ish guy. I don't think that he's going to be a 75-point guy for, the rest of his time as a Vancouver Canuck. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are some decisions here, but I don't get a sense from the coaching staff that breaking up Hughes and Hronek is something that's in their plans or in the works here anytime soon.
We had a good debate yesterday, Blake and I, whether the management team would ask them to do that just for a look-see. Let's move on. Elias Pettersson. And Jeff, what's your sense of how much angst there is around Canucks management to know something on Elias before the deadline? Because if Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin are going to make a big swing, the likes of which we saw last year with the acquisition of Philip Hronek, and the sorts of swings that have been the MO of Jim Rutherford over the years. Let's remember he has presided over a pop-up Stanley Cup winner in 2006 with Carolina. So I would suspect that they're looking at doing everything they can to try and strengthen this team's cup chances. What do you think they need to know, if anything, about Elias Pettersson's intentions before the early March trade deadline?
It feels like we've just come through this road trip here where there were a couple of reports that sort of felt to me like management is trying to message now, hey, we have made it abundantly clear that we are open for business. We want to talk, and it's on the player. Now, I don't think that there's any sort of fraction at this point. Like, I'm not suggesting that there's a divide. Obviously, there's a gap. Otherwise, they would have closed it. But just the messaging that's out there kind of feels like management saying to the fan base, we have given it every effort to open the talks here, to get this moving, and it's now on the player. And it's his prerogative. He has the right to remain silent. We know that Elias Pettersson, keeps things close to the vest and isn't an open book at the best of times. So I'm not really surprised here. But at the same time, again, I think you can massage your own message. I think you can, whether it's through yourself or your agent. I know that he's denied requests to speak about the contract here midseason, and that's fine. Again, this guy's having an incredible season. We know that the last time that he went through a contract battle with the Vancouver Canucks, he admitted after the fact that it took a toll on him. So I can understand, like, if he just wants to focus on hockey, but a peep, a hint, something that would suggest that he wants to remain a Vancouver Canuck over the long haul, that he's encouraged by what he's seen here. Because I think at the outset of the season, guys, that was one of the things, right? We all thought, well, they need to prove to him that they can put a winning team on the ice. Well, they've done that, and he's been a huge part of it. And it's just been absolute cone of silence from Elias Pettersson and his camp to this point. So, I don't think anybody should be nervous, but I also have always felt like he's such a shrewd operator here that I'm not sure anybody can truly get a read on what he's thinking in the short term or the long term here. And like, there is a part of me, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, this is not reporting, but there is a part of me that wouldn't be shocked to see him play his way to unrestricted free agency or put the Canucks in a position where there is uncertainty that they have to make a move. I don't know. I mean,
well, his reasons are drying up here. He said that he didn't want to negotiate because he didn't want the distraction. Well, now not negotiating is becoming the distraction. Yep. And the fact is, he holds all the cards now. He was put off by the last negotiation because he was in a bit of a no man's land in terms of how much term should be on, what the price should be. I don't think there's
didn't have arb rights,
right? I don't think there's much gray area here. You've got all the cards, Elias. Just tell us if it begins with an 11 or a 12, and we'll sign the darn paperwork. Like, it's all on him. I don't think this should be a stressful negotiation at all.
Well, and and I'm not the first to say this, but that media day at the All-Star game, like he's probably, if there's anything he's losing sleep over right now, it's probably that in the center of the universe. He knows. I mean, part of being an All-Star is putting yourself out there for 15 or 20 minutes and just letting people ask questions. There's nowhere to hide. So that's going to be fascinating theater. Again, it's not his favorite part of the gig. You can tell that even just working with the local media here. So I can't imagine that part's going to thrill him, but it comes to the territory. And at some point, there are going to be some pressure points for him, whether facing the media is a true pressure point. Whatever the case, it might advance the story even a little bit to get a sense of what he's thinking, because he just, at least publicly, has given no indication of what the season has meant to him individually, collectively, for the group, the direction the hockey club is going. And you're right, like the season he's having, all the leverage over on his side. He could name his price right now if he chose to. So what is holding him back? I guess that's
and
the
they
question.
may be waiting for just that, for Vancouver to hit, the Canucks to hit the point of extreme desperation where they effectively write the blank check and say, Elias, you fill
I get the feeling that's pretty much it now already, that blank check is available to him. I mean, try it.
Yeah. And I do wonder whether this management group and this ownership group is getting a little frustrated at this point, because look, it's not critical that you know something by trade deadline, but if trade deadline comes and goes and you still don't have Elias on a contract, then Jeff, you absolutely must know by July 1st.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, or even the draft, really, a few days beforehand. Because at that point, you are making significant decisions about the next year and several years thereafter, and you're going to need to know heads or tails from your star centerman if he's in, and at what dollar number he's in, not to mention term as well. So lots to mull here in the second half of a Canucks. It's never boring, huh?
Nope.
Even when they're winning,
No.
there are matters to discuss. Great stuff, Jeff. We'll catch up Friday.
All right. Sounds good, guys.
This clip brought to you by Betway. Must be 19 plus to play. Please play responsibly.